Back again was another Dragon Quest review, and it's another spin-off. Oh joy, after the last two, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are wary on these goddamn spin-offs. But this spin-off in particular is part of a long-running sub-series of Dragon Quest games known as the Dragon Quest Monster series. And if you talk to people who play Dragon Quest or got themselves into Dragon Quest, they probably will tell you they got into playing the Game Boy version of Dragon Quest Monsters or Dragon Quest Monster Joker on DS. And you guys know me, I'm very much a recent Dragon Quest fan that's played the mainline Dragon Quest games alongside Dragon Quest Builders 1 and 2. But you guys also know if you watched the channel that I already made a video talking about how much I love this game. But of course I only focused on one aspect, and you might be curious about how I feel about the story, the graphics, or some other aspects of the gameplay, which is why I'm doing this review. So without further ado, let's begin. We're introduced to Sorrow, a half-human, half-monster who during his childhood had a pretty shit life. People would pick on him, and those who would stand up for him would end up turning their backs on him because they found out he's half monster. And it gets to a point where a group of villagers burn down his whole house. What assholes. Anyways, one day Sorrow's mom, who's been dealing with a major illness, is slowly succumbing to it. And Sorrow decides to head down to Nideria and convince his dad, who's the king of Nideria, to fix her up. And because anime edgelords have to have the most dickhead dads out there, Sorrow's dad tells him to fuck off. So, off to plan B, which is drawing his blade against his own dad, and Sorrow's dad doesn't take kindly to it and curses him to be unable to harm a single monster. And before his dad can do anything else, the Son of Dragon saves Sorrow in the nick of time and tells him that off-screen his mother died. How tragic. And he also tells Sorrow to relinquish his monster side and live his life fully as a human, to which Sorrow says nuts to that, he wants revenge on his dad, and the Son of Dragon just responds with, okay, come back if you change your mind. So years go on by and Sorrow has taken refuge in Rose Hill, and he learns from one day it happens there, Monty, if he wants to go out and fight monsters, he will have to become a monster wrangler. So Sorrow learns the ropes from him alongside this fuzzy creature named Fuzzy, and Sorrow uses what he learns to fight in the monster tournament to where he meets Rose, a young elf girl who can cry ruby tears. And you can tell that's quite valuable to some people. Anyways, a scene goes by that's quite similar to a scene in a post-game, and Rose takes a liking to Sorrow and decides to stay with him in Rose Hill. And the inhabitants of Rose Hill are quite welcoming to her, to the point where they build a tower for her just so she's protected from humans. Anyway, Sorrow participates in another monster tournament in Endor, and he learns from a cat that he can partake in monster tournaments down in Nideria, and he gives him a travel stone to travel straight down there. And with the help of Rose, who can use her elf powers to travel them down to Nideria, they manage to break down the whole tower of Rose Hill down to Nideria so Sorrow can participate. And Sorrow does and wins and gets another travel stone to travel to another location in Nideria. And this is where they meet Toylan Trouble, a thief who takes a liking to Sorrow because he feels Sorrow has a lot in common with him. And this is basically what the story becomes, with Sorrow, Rose, and Toylan traveling around to different locations in Nideria and solving the problems that the inhabitants have there. And that's the main premise to Dragon Quest Monsters The Dark Prince, and I find it to be quite serviceable. I do like how we're introduced to Sorrow quite well. We are given his backstory, to which we don't really know much in the original game being Dragon Quest IV, and I do like how some plot points do connect to Dragon Quest IV as a whole. But even then I do have problems. Once you go down to Nideria, the story becomes very much lather, rinse, repeat in that regard. You go to one location, you find out there's a problem, you fix the problem, everyone's thankful, you grab another travel stone, and you do it all over again. In many ways, it's quite similar to the story structure of Dragon Quest VII, but in that game's defense, which I'm surprised I'm defending that game, at the very least I was at least more connected to the characters in those locations in comparison to Dragon Quest Monsters The Dark Prince, where you talk to some people, you don't really get much about them, and you just help them. And I think the other problem I have does tie in with Sorrow, or more so what he doesn't do in this game, which is talk. Yeah, for whatever reason they turned Sorrow into the silent protagonist in this game. And to be fair, every mainline Dragon Quest game, and some spin-offs do have silent protagonists. It's always been their MO. But my problem is, this is Sorrow we're talking about here. A person that has an established character in Dragon Quest IV, a person that we know talks in that game, and here he is all silent and we don't really know much of what he's thinking at any current moment in time. And I would be fine if this was an original character that was established to be the silent protag. But this is Sorrow we're talking about here. A character that we know in Dragon Quest IV, we know who he is, we know his characteristics, and in this game, they basically sucked all that away from us. Especially when he barely emotes in this game. Hell, the Luminary has more expressions than this guy. At least he smiled from time to time. While Sorrow has this blank-ass expression for the majority of the game. And to put salt in the wound, which this isn't a spoiler, he does show up in the trailers, Solo does appear in this game, and he talks. And I'm just sitting here wondering, so it's okay for the silent protagonist who's been established in the first place to be silent, to talk in this game, but not the character who talked in the original game? How does that make sense right there? Case in point, Star Wars should have talked, end of story. And there's also some other issues I do have with the story, but we'll save those for later because those pertain to spoilers. But let's move on to the graphics of the game, to which I'm sure many of you guys already know how I would feel about the graphics to Dark Prince, seeing how I've talked about Dragon Quest Treasures and how much I didn't like those graphics. And yeah, overall, I do think graphically, the Dark Prince does look mediocre. There's a lot of low poly environments in this game. I personally feel textures could have been touched up a little bit, and even with the cel shading look, which I did praise, it doesn't do enough to make this look more pleasing. I'm not looking for a high-end graphical game, I'm just looking for something that looks presentable. And to make matters worse, performance-wise, this game does seem to lag at launch, running around the mid-20s and sometimes going down to the mid-teens. It's definitely a very laggy game. And on top of it, ultimately, the game is prone to crashing. I've had this game crash on me 3 times. But thankfully though, an update has come out for this game and has addressed the performance issues and the crashing issues. I haven't seen this game crash just yet, and the performance has greatly improved, though the performance is not perfect by any means. Moving on to presentation, the game's pretty consistent, but in a mediocre way. As characters tend to move around with a stick up their ass when it comes down to cutscenes, characters just tend to stand around and talk, and while there are some scenes that do look better than others, it's not by much. And I do understand this game is probably made on a budget, so they didn't have enough money to spend on good looking cutscenes. But what I can say is the voice acting is pretty solid. Whether you play it in English or Japanese, you're definitely going to have a good time. I mostly played this game in Japanese and I find it to be really good, but based on the few clips I've heard from the English dub, I thought it was pretty solid. And as for the music, it's your typical Dragon Quest midis. They use a lot of music from Dragon Quest IV and the monster games with some sprinkles of the other mainline games, but it makes sense they're using a lot of music from Dragon Quest IV because this game is based on Dragon Quest IV. But anyways, I think it's time to move on to the gameplay, to which it's a turn-based RPG with a monster catching mechanic. You can have 8 monsters on hand to travel around the world while the rest of your monsters stay in the pasture. Though keep in mind you're only allowed to have 4 monsters to fight in battle, while the remaining 4 have to be in your backhand. And on top of that, if you catch a larger monster, those take up 2 spaces, so do keep that in mind. And while you're doing battles, monsters tend to do their own attacks when you command them to attack. And yes, you can change up their tactics to be more offensive, defensive, be a healer, what have you. Or you can directly command them to do direct attacks. But for the most part, you're just letting your monster do their thing and making sure you win the battle. And as for catching monsters, you have 2 methods, one of them being the RNG method and the other one being scouting. The RNG method is basically the one you don't want to fully rely on, as it's basically just you hoping at the end of the battle the monster wants to join up with you. While the scouting method, you're given a percentage chance of a probability of catching a monster, and you're probably going to rely on this more. And of course, because this is an RPG, of course there's leveling up, and much like Dragon Quest 8, 9, and some of the monster games, your monsters are given skill points every time they level up, and you can allocate those to skill trees. Some of them give you extra skills and spells, and others give you stat boosts. And I have to say, make sure you max out those skill boosters, because when you start using monsters, and you have your skill boosters maxed out, you get the next level of stat boosting. Which makes it a good time to talk about monster fusing in this game. Once your monsters reach level 10, you can go out and fuse them to make a stronger monster. And at first it can be quite intimidating because you're probably not sure exactly how to fuse each monster, and there's a way to make this more easier. Just go to reverse search, turn off possible monsters, and there you go, you get a comprehensive list of the monsters you can fuse or any potential monsters you can fuse. And make sure you aim for the gold ones because those are the more optimal monsters you want to fuse with. And it will eventually get to a point where you start looking up online guides to find monsters you want exactly, and you get all the monsters you need to fuse it to that particular monster. And it definitely feels rewarding to get to that point because you basically grinded your ass off to get that strong monster that you need. And especially when you're a Dragon Quest fan and you recognize the bosses from other mainline games, that's even more rewarding for you because you want to reach to that point. And for non-Dragon Quest fans, I'm pretty sure they'll enjoy the grinding aspect of getting a strong-ass monster they want. But anyways, let's move on to the world traversal, as there's multiple areas in Nigeria, and they're pretty spacious, and you can find tons of monsters there. And the interesting thing about these locations is they have a season system, basically an expanded day and night system. Every once in a while the season will change, terrain will change, some areas will now be open to you, and you'll have brand new monsters to go on and catch. And of course there's 4 seasons being spring, summer, fall, and winter. It's definitely a nice system, and I do feel other RPGs should try to adapt a season system rather than the typical day and night system. Though my main problem is because some monsters are exclusive to particular seasons, sometimes you're basically just waiting around just so the season can change. And there are ways to change the season faster with seasoning packets, but those have limited use. And you do get something that has unlimited use, but that's way later in the game. So most of the time, you're mostly just sitting around throughout the main game if you want a particular monster. And aside from these worlds, you also have dungeons to go on and explore as well. At first, they start pretty linear, where you go from point A to point B with some deviations to find some treasure, but eventually they become much more puzzle-based once you get to the upper echelons in Nideria. And of course, at the end of each dungeon, you go on and face a boss, which are pretty easy at first, but eventually they become quite hard, as they have attacks that can hit all your monsters at once. And there were some times where I lost to a boss about 4 or 5 times. And it got to the point where I started deploying a tactic to where I just use healing items every time when I had the chance. And of course, there's monster tournaments as well, one in Endor, one in Nideria, and they're actually pretty optional after you do the first 2 tournaments in Endor and the first 3 tournaments in Nideria. You don't really need to do them at all for the most part. And in the end, I personally feel the rewards you get for winning the tournaments aren't that useful. But speaking of rewards, mini-medals aren't in this game, and much like many other Dragon Quest games, once you reach a certain threshold, you're essentially given an award for finding that many mini-medals. And I find the mini-medal rewards to be much more useful than the monster tournament rewards, as you do get monsters like metal slimes. But it's now time to talk about the Betamax existence. Once you reach the middle echelon of Nideria, eggs will start popping around the world, and at most you'll find 3 eggs. And the kicker here is that once you find an egg and collect it, it will immediately hatch and out pops the monster, and it's all RNG of what you get. And there's levels to this, being regular eggs, silver eggs, gold eggs, and rainbow eggs, but that's not the kicker right there. The kicker is, there's egg-exclusive monsters in this game, meaning that if you want that monster you need a fuse to get the strongest monster out there, you need to go out and find a bunch of f***ing eggs just to get the monster you need. And it's the biggest gotcha bullshit in this game. I feel like one of those simps who wanted Cosmos in Xenoblade 2. That's how I feel when trying to find these goddamn eggs, because I want that one monster to get the stronger monster, but here I am, finding all these goddamn eggs, and I get nothing! It is goddamn fucking bullshit. And yes, there are ways to lessen the bullshit by fighting 10 monsters, collecting 3 eggs in one location, and then going to a different area by turning off autosave, and if you don't get the monster you need, you can always reset. But even then, it's fucking bullshit! Every time I go on and find an egg and it's not what I want, it's turning it off, going back to that location, still getting fucking bullshit. And yes, the recent update has fixed that issue, but I had to torture myself finding these goddamn fucking eggs. So yeah, I have the right to bitch. But anyways, before we get to spoilers, let's talk about the DLC. And there's only really one that I care about talking about, being Don Mole. And the reason why is because when you talk to him, he brings you down to his hole to where you can find monsters you previously scouted. And that also includes fusion-only monsters and egg-exclusive monsters. So yeah, this mole is quite useful, and previously, if you went down the hole and you didn't find the monster you need, you have to leave and then re-enter. But with the recent update, they changed it to where if you find a monster down the hole, another monster will spawn in its place. So yeah, Square Enix has definitely made this game much more convenient to play. But anyways, it's time to talk about spoilers, and if you don't want to be spoiled, skip to this portion right here. Anyways, getting back to the story, and you can probably already tell this is a prequel to Dragon Quest IV, and becomes a retelling of Dragon Quest IV from Sorrow's perspective. You'll see events from Dragon Quest IV like Sorrow participating in the human monster tournament, the same one that Elena participated in, alongside some extra scenes like Sorrow meeting with the Senate Dragon, and the Senate Dragon telling him that Estark's returning and he wants him to work with the heroes to take him down. And that's where you find out that Sorrow still has the intention of killing his dad, and on top of that, he wants to lay waste to the humans. Which leads to Toilen Trouble to leave your group because he knows he's on that human extermination list. And of course, like in Dragon Quest IV, Rose being very conflicted about Sorrow's decisions. And of course, eventually Sorrow will head down to the hero's hometown to lay waste to the village, but turns out it wasn't Sorrow that laid waste to the village, it's actually Sorrow's older brother. To which, let me explain here, the king of Nideria went out and scored with 3 women, an elf, a monster, and a human, and gave birth to 3 kids. And he hopes his oldest son, being full monster, can take the reins of becoming king of Nideria, and once he does so, Sorrow's dad intends to kill the other 2. What an asshole. So anyway, Sorrow's older brother lays waste to Solo's hometown, pretending to be Sorrow the Manslayer, in hopes that Solo goes after you rather than him. But anyways, the adventure continues, and Sorrow reawakens Estark, and of course, Solo in this game takes down Estark. Rose gets captured by a group of humans, she dies, Sorrow uses the Secrets of Evolution to become Estark and dies as well. And you would think that would be the end of the game, because that's how it ended in Dragon Quest IV, but Toilen Trouble uses the Sands of Time to reverse those events to save Rose and Sorrow. And from then on, this game becomes an alternate timeline story. I have some thoughts about that, but we'll save those for later. But anyways, it turns back to being the 3 amigos of Sorrow, Rose, and Toilen traveling to the upper echelons of Nideria, and solving those problems. And eventually Sorrow meets up with Arma and the Asshole, takes him down. Arma manages to escape, presents the secrets of evolution to Sorrow's dad. Sorrow's dad says, "Fuck you, I don't need it anymore because I have the super secrets of evolution." And he trusts his oldest son will take down Sorrow. To which of course leads to Sorrow heading down to where his dad is, taking down 4 towers to break down the shield of the castle. In a very similar fashion to how Solo did in Dragon Quest IV, Sorrow takes down his brother with the help of Solo. He heads into the castle, and the castle is literally designed the same way how the castle was in Dragon Quest IV. He fights his father, and even with the super secrets of evolution, Sorrow takes him down. And Sorrow's dad removes the monster curse from him and tells him to take the throne of King of Naderia, to which Sorrow just leaves, doesn't even take the throne. And the Son of Dragon goes on and picks him up and brings him back to Rose Hill. And that's the end of the base game, but there's of course post-game in this game to where you meet with Sorrow's younger brother Ludo, and he tells you the location of another S-Dark. And I forgot to mention, there's 2 other S-Darks in this game, alongside the one we know, and the whole backstory behind that is some angel fell ranks with the Son of Dragon and created 3 creatures to lay waste to the world. And Sorrow already took down the other S-Dark, and the location of the third one was unknown until Ludo tells you. So you head over to that location, take down that S-Dark, and this is where you find out that your younger brother Ludo wants to create a world with no pain. But that of course means destroying Naderia and the human world. And of course Sorrow doesn't want that, he fights his younger brother, takes him down, and that's the end of Dragon Quest Monsters The Dark Prince. And as you can tell with the alternate timeline portion of this game, you can tell that's my main issue. I kind of wished it kind of stuck to being a retelling of Dragon Quest IV from Sorrow's perspective. But with the alternate timeline crap, it basically tells me that this is non-canon to Dragon Quest IV. Sure, you can consider some portions of this plot to be canon to Dragon Quest IV, but you can't take the whole game and consider it canon. And that's where my issues lay. But anyways, I think it's time for us to finish up. Dragon Quest Monsters The Dark Prince, despite its flaws with the story, the graphics, the performances at launch, and the goddamn egg hunting, I'm not entirely bothered by those problems, as I find the game to be very addicting due to the monster fusing system. As there was points in times where I wasn't even progressing with the story, I was going out my way finding different monsters and fusing them to get stronger monsters. There would be points in time where I'd be spending 5 hours in one location just because I wanted to grind my monsters up. And for me personally, if I find the game to be very addicting and I can ignore other aspects, I consider that to be an enjoyable game for me. Who cares if the story has some problems, who cares if Sorrow doesn't talk, and as long as I'm having fun, that's really all that matters to me. And I'm pretty sure I don't need to tell Dragon Quest Monster fans or Dragon Quest fans in general that you should pick up this game. They probably already picked up the game in the first place. And just based on sales from Japan, there's definitely a great response to this game. Though I'm pretty sure for those who've never played a Dragon Quest Monster game or Dragon Quest in general, I would say this: try out the demo on Nintendo Switch and see if you like it first. If you don't like it, don't pick up the game. If you like it, pick up the game for $60, or if you're unsure, then wait for a price drop. As for me though, I've definitely enjoyed my time with The Dark Prince, and I'm definitely willing to try out the other Dragon Quest Monster games. Maybe start up the Game Boy stream again. Thank you guys for sticking to the end of this video, and let me know what you think about Dragon Quest Monsters The Dark Prince down in the comments below. And if you liked this video, consider hitting that like button. And you want to see more videos, do check out these videos here. I think you'll enjoy them. See you guys on the next one. Take care.